Another very important feature that we contact every day is the customer. And we are concerned, the huge uncertainty out there at the moment. And we're saying very clearly that as part of this, there must be some mechanisms, particularly from the major banks, to give some solace to those homeowners that find themselves in a difficult position to repay particularly mortgages. And for those small businesses that on a temporary basis are finding difficulty. And what we're saying is, building into this particular scenario, there must be mechanisms that can address the public anger that NAMA is bailing out property developers and bailing out banks and not interested in the ordinary people on the ground. And then what we talk about is a strategy dealing with the change after NAMA. And we talk about 5 things that need to happen. First of all, we're saying very clearly to government that we need to have a strategy based on the partnership principle at national level. That how are we going to manage the change agenda in our industry? We're saying today that NAMA is not an easy option for us to give even qualified support to it. It will result in job losses. It will result with change. But what we're suggesting that it's managed through consultation and agreement with trade unions in line with the partnership principles. And very important on the issue of job security for staff, what we're suggesting is that there should be job security put in place on the basis that if there is going to be redundancies, it's done on a voluntary basis. We also believe that the banks can't have an a la carte approach to trade unions in the industry. And at this point in time, some banks, for example, are refusing to recognise IBOA to collectively bargain for managers. Some institutions, to date, have refused to engage in us, even though we represent the majority of their staff. And some parts of the industry only want us to represent clerical staff and people in the retail sector, and are reluctant to give us representation for other entities within the industry. And what we're saying very clearly to the industry, and what we're saying to government, where we represent people, and if we're going to be part of the solution to this, there should be clear recognition for us, and accepted by the banks and government, to deal with the issues that we have to deal with in the future. And that's not an unreasonable ask. And finally, we don't want, and we want this commitment from government, we don't want this initiative to be used by maybe government or used by management through government to dismantle the pay and terms and conditions of our members. And the concern obviously we will all have is that if you look at the vast amounts of money that the banks will to some extent have to forego in terms of their own balance sheet if NAMA is to be successful. We don't want them then turning around and saying we need to cut the pay and the terms and conditions of staff because of NAMA. And we want out in front a recognition that in the management of the future of this industry, it's done through consultation and agreement. And we don't have the initiatives by senior management that we've seen in the past as part of the culture. And that is to force through change over the heads of staff because of some edict from government. So in essence, what we're saying today is that this is a conditional support for the NAMA proposition as tabled by government. We're saying that it's conditional on the basis, number one, there must be an introduction of a suitable mechanism to monitor the provision of credit to the participating institutions. And that must be done in an open and transparent way to see that it actually achieves its number one objective. Secondly, it needs to look at expanding the regulating system, and we set out some proposals to do that. Thirdly, there must be a whistleblower's charter or code of practice, or indeed legislation, to put in place protection for staff who have blown the whistle in the past and haven't been looked on in any favourable light and are still in fear of their future in the industries we talk about. We need to look at how do we look at the governance and corporate governance of banks, which means changing the structure of shareholders and more importantly changing the structure of boards that have it more representative of the bodies now that will be actually controlling the future direction of our industry. And we want protection for homeowners as part of this process. And we recognise there's a sensitivity and there's a very thin line between giving an impression to the international market that this is about reneging on debt, to looking at what we're hearing from the industry in the last number of weeks and days, that they're not foreclosing on people of homeowners who are in difficulty, except in exceptional circumstances. So we need a practice or a code to be put in place to ensure that the kind of minimum numbers we're talking about are continued, certainly during the duration of the NAMA proposition being worked out. We want a public inquiry into our industry And we want that very focused. And we feel the best place for that is that the senior people in all of the agencies linked to our industry talk about how we've got into these difficulties. And we try and learn the lessons of that for the future. And finally, we want to put in place an agreed framework of managing the change in our industry. This is a very, very difficult time for bank officials. You know yourselves, they're being vilified and they're being maligned. And in the debate at the moment, nobody is differentiating between the senior bankers that have caused this problem and the vast majority of bankers that have no responsibility whatsoever for these decisions. And if you look at the enormity of the 90 billion we're talking about in terms of the extent that government wants to put work in progress to address, that equates to about 1,000 customers. About 50 of those people are talking about owning the majority of those particular 90 billion. And our members have no and act our part in those decision making. That was done at the senior level in our industry. These are the problems that have created the difficulty. And I suppose what we're saying as IBOA The Finance Union, this is about analysis of the options available, an opportunity to consult with our members and to give direction to the public, to government, to the political parties. And from today our members will be lobbying all political parties, setting out the scene for us and asking them to take on board our representation and to dial votes on this next week.